the poet, the figure model who loves to show it. All these are beat. All these you'll meet in a bucket of blood. Come, enjoy yourself. Where the hilarious enjoy the horrifying in a bucket of blood.
No, you're gonna shoot me! Don't shoot!
Come to the land of living dreams, where realists dream of the unreal.
Walter, you've done something to me. Something deep down inside of my prana. Oh, Walter, I want to be with you. You're creative.
Beatniks at their bawdiest. The creative urge at its most primitive.
I'm deeply moved, and I shall compose a poem.
Love is art. Art is love. It's the weirdest and the wildest.
I don't want to make statues anymore. I want to get married. To you.
Anniversary to this awesome double feature of Roger Corman 1959 features. I've got an awesome panel to chat about them with me. Let's bring our folks in and then let's say hello to Nile Arena.
Hello.
And Lin Morris.
Morning, everyone, or whatever time it is when you're watching.
And we are here chatting about Bucket of Blood from 1959 and The Wasp Woman, also from 1959, celebrating their anniversary. Thanks for coming on the show, everybody, and welcome. Lin, thank you. This is your first time on the show. Thank you for joining us. Lin and I know each other from the IMDb message boards way back in the day, and it's a thrill to have you in the mix finally. We've been working on it for a while.
Yes, thank you so much. I'm so thrilled to be asked.
And Lin is also operating on minimal sleep because he just completed a transatlantic flight and we're going to get you wrapped up and on your way to bed as soon as possible. This is the perfect kind of double feature, though, to be discussing because this feels like the kind of late night, hazy viewing. Do you remember when you saw Bucket of Blood for the first time, Lin?
It would probably be when I was in junior high, many decades ago. We had our local late night horror movie host, Victor Ives from Sinister Cinema, and I'm sure that's probably has to be where I saw it.
Great. And Niall, how about you?
Well, I think watching the special features on the Howling DVD when that was new to DVD for the very first time, I think I was aware of Dick Miller, maybe from Gremlins or just, kind of character actor kind of bits here and there. But they showed a clip from Bucket of Blood in the, whatever, Joe Dante talking about why his character is named Walter Paisley as the kind of occult bookstore owner or expert in-house. And the clip, I was like, what is this? And raced out and watched it. I think it was on one of those, I think with the Wasp Woman, but it was one of those kind of very odd, almost like kind of long rectangular CD jewel cases where the entire thing, they didn't make, I don't think, DVDs in that packaging for very long because they would, crack, but it was like all translucent plastic. And so, yeah, probably watched it. Probably 10th grade, sometime in there when I was kind of really devouring anything and everything horror that I could find.
And like a lot of Roger Corman's film group distributed films, this one fell into public domain. And so it and Wasp Woman both showed up on a lot of those 50-pack public domain box sets. And so I think that's how I may have seen it that way for the first time. I know that's the manner in which I've seen it the most times. I may have seen it like on a late night screening on Creature Features or something like that. But my memory of it is watching it on a public domain DVD. And since then, it's been cleaned up numerous times, and you really can see it in all its glory now. We will talk about Bucket of Blood, and then we'll switch over to Wasp Woman. But just kind of the context for this film, 1959, Roger Corman is truly the king of the bees at this point. He owns the drive-ins. He has been producing films since 1954. and is consistently putting out material, oftentimes through American International Pictures. We've done a few highlights of Corman films on this show already, but what was maybe your introduction to Roger Corman? Nile, kick us off with that.
As a name, kind of probably before even seeing any of his movies, I think it comes up, things like The Simpsons or things like that, where it's like, the film within the show of seeing some kind of schlocky thing. So, he was kind of synonymous with a certain level of maybe quality or absence thereof. But I think even before I saw any of his films, I saw him, in an acting role in The Silence of the Lambs.
All right.
Probably at far too young an age, but it was one of those, it was already kind of on the cable circuit. So, kind of at a friend's house. But as far as his movies, it really was the AMC horror movie marathons that would always happen on Halloween with the AIP era Edgar Allan Poe adaptations, or, something like Haunted Palace, that he really kind of, it kind of, and he might have even hosted one.
He did.
Yeah. Him kind of as a presence, as kind of this elder statesman at that point, we're talking about the mid to late 90s. I think that was my intro to him kind of as this all in one presence. It was kind of still that era where a lot of the folks who, whatever had kind of dominated the mid-century America, whether it was, publishing or anything like that, but in the same way that kind of knowing who Stan Lee was before knowing, like, well, did he draw these comic books? Did he start the publishing company? But just those kind of presences. And Roger Corman, I think, was very much that for genre movies of a certain ilk.
Cool. Lynn, how about you? When did Roger Corman become Roger Corman to you?
This one I actually know. It's on two levels. First, I've always loved horror movies. The smallish hometown I grew up in had a theater that always played like second run, but then it would also show older movies from years later. And my sister took me to see The Pit and the Pendulum, and I think it was Fall of the House of Usher. And so it's the only context I had for him was knowing these two movies. And then as I would see more horror movies and then just more movies and read up on movies, I would see his name more and more and more often. And then I got into the whole 70s exploitation movies, which I love to this day. But I definitely remember associating him with the Poe series.
Yeah, that was probably my introduction as well, that's when I knew who Roger Corman was, seeing the Vincent Price, Edgar Allan Poe adaptations. What's interesting about these two films we're talking about today is this is right on the cusp of that. I talked about him being the king of the bees. This was just before he floated his big idea to Sam Arkoff and James Nicholson to say, what if we took the budget of two of these black and white films and did a color film? And that was Fall of the House of Usher. And that kind of elevated him to a new level. He was seen as a savvy filmmaker and businessman, but suddenly he became an artiste once he started doing these color gothics, which were inspired by the Hammer films. But let's circle back around to Bucket of Blood, because as you mentioned, Nile, it is one of the lone starring features for character actor Dick Miller. And his character, Walter Paisley, appears in numerous other films, even though he comes to a pretty concise ending at the end of this one. But yeah, if you don't mind, give us a little kickoff intro as to what Bucket of Blood is about.
Sure. Well, I think it kind of, obviously it's a cozy double feature with the Wasp Woman, and they're from the same year. And in fact, I imagine they probably played often together. But
double features, yeah.
Watching it again last night, it seems like it's a cozy double feature also with a movie from just a couple years later, which is Night Tide with Dennis Hopper. Just as far as that kind of look at this kind of loneliness and alienation, this guy who really wants to belong. In this case, Bucket of Blood, it's Walter Paisley, who just wants so badly. He's a busboy at this kind of beatnik cafe / kind of music venue, the Yellow Door, right? That striving, kind of to be able to create, but an impatience with maybe the limits of his talent leads him to a tragic accident, and then having to replicate that in the absence of again, any time dedicated or wherewithal or talent. The thing that makes it endure, at least to me, I was thinking about it like, well, it's really skewering these beatniks. We're hot on the heels in 1959. I think On the Road comes out in 57, at least as far as first publication. Howl is 1956, maybe, and then, there's the obscenity trial and everything. But, we're steeped in the kind of beatnik as this kind of cultural phenomenon era, both on TV and in film, and then across the pond with the kind of angry young man. These plays, the kind of, post-war era has kind of given out to whatever tensions are kind of underlying this generation that's come home. But, it's not just Steve Allen reading out lyrics to bongo drums, right? A Bucket of Blood isn't. There's a little bit more love there than just, mockery. And I think that's why we're still talking about it today, 65 years later, that if it was just Bob Denver with a goatee on and a beret, we'd be like, well, okay, yeah, this is a nice museum artifact of, kind of the way people were responding to this thing. I think it's a little bit more there, even when it does kind of drift into mocking people and people wearing a tuxedo with sandals and things like that.
Lin, what's the appeal for you?
Actually, I have kind of the opposite reaction. The beatnik part is my least favorite aspect. It struck me, I rewatched it yesterday at Minneapolis St. Paul Airport on my phone because I'd watched it like a month ago. And I kept flashing to like the Brady Bunch when you had like older men writing, contemporary dialogue. And it just, the beatnik dialogue in this just really struck me as false. I like the movie, but it just struck me as, here's someone wrote this movie who has no idea what they're talking about. I do love Walter, and I feel for him. I like the second half of the movie the most because I think the first couple of killings are sort of random.
Yeah.
Accident, and then like he has the moment of panic when he kills the narc, But I feel like from the the pursuit and murder of Alice, from then on, I think it's a great thriller and a psychological study. I really do think it's valid as that.
Well, right, because we watch him kind of spiraling because he needs that affirmation.
Yes.
He wants, as you pointed out, he wants so desperately to belong. What's funny is, like, I was looking at the poster art for this film, and it's billed as a comedy. Like, it is, you'll die laughing, that kind of thing. There's definitely some funny elements to it, but it gets pretty dark toward the end. Like watching Walter so possessed by the idea of creating so that he can belong, and people who don't want to partner with him and people who don't want to connect with him, they just become more mill for the gross. Because it reminds me, suddenly the light bulb went off after I watched it this most recent time, how they were able to do Little Shop of Horrors in 2 days. It's because it's basically the same story. Little Shop of Horrors is Bucket of Blood, but instead of being an artist, he wants to be a famous horticulturalist so that he can earn the love of Audrey. But I'm like, it's right that like the first couple of murders are accidental, and then he ends up having to kill people so that he can keep feeding. That's how they did it. It's because they didn't have to come up with a story. They just went, let's just redo Bucket of Blood. Dick Miller generates a lot more empathy than Jonathan Hayes as Seymour. Like, Seymour is much more likable, but we really feel for Walter because he feels so disconnected and so far away from what he wants to be.
Yeah, I don't think there's any better visualization on film of having that gulf between talent and ambition than Bia knows as he's trying to sculpt the clay in the beginning before the boiling over and the knife in the wall and everything. There's even, I think, Art Spiegelman, the cartoonist and author, of Mouse and a lot of other things, came out with kind of a flip book called Bia Knows, with Dick Miller kind of in duress, sculpting on the cover. And it was kind of a mix and match kind of face book, with the kind of 3 or 4 slits. So it lives on, I think, and I think one of the reasons it's so beloved by fans, but also I think filmmakers and people, in craft, whether it's in the genre, horror films or not, is, I think we've all felt, I know I have, trying to put ears and a face on something, and it's just clay with your thumbprints on it. It's just not. It's not being a nose.
Yeah, I think Niall raises a great point about just the lack of ability is so frustrating, because I write as Dr. AC knows, and there are times when you're just looking at used to be the blank page, now the blank screen, and it's like, I doubt my talent every day, or every time I sit down to write, and so that was my in with Walt. Sorry to call him Seymour. Walter is that empathy, and just his. I think Dick Miller is so good at just showing that naked vulnerability of like he just wants to belong with these people, no matter how badly they treat him. My favorite scene in the movie is when he proposes to Barbara Morris. I can't think of her character's name right now, and I love Barbara Morris, not just because we have the same last name, but just that whole conversation. I just felt like that lifted the movie to a completely different plane. It's so relatable on both sides.
Yeah.
And it does, she's not the villain for rejecting him. And he gets really, really angry, but he gets kind of understandably angry, if that makes sense. Though murderous is kind of,
because we relate to him so much, we do understand, like we're like, this is he's doing all this to earn her love. Exactly. And then to not get that love is like, well, why did I do all this? But yes, let's talk a little bit about our supporting cast, because I think Barbara Morris is wonderful, both in this film and Wasp Woman. I had realized that I'd programmed a Barbara Morris double feature, but I'm glad I did, because I think she's just so innately likable. And I don't know what else she did much beyond these films with Corman. I think
she died fairly young.
She's kind of like Jackie Joseph in that regard, and that, Jackie Joseph playing Audrey in Little Shop is just so delightful and never really went on to have a big career.
Yeah.
But yeah, Barbara Morris is wonderful. Julian Burton as our beat poet. Lynn, I understand you don't love the beat poet. So I think that's almost by design. I think Corman is heightening it and making it really bad beat poetry so as to kind of point up the absurdity of it all. But I do love the phrases that come out of these people's mouths, because they're just so outrageous. His whole poetry slam. But I also love, like our character that wants Walter to do something with her piranha. I enjoy the cast, and I think everybody's really. I think Anthony Carbone is also in this as well, and he did quite a few films with Corman over the years. He plays our club owner,
which I think is another good character. And I mean, again, this thing, like, is it kind of skewering this new movement of the era? Yeah, of course, and like probably without much thought to what it would be for posterity. But I think it is shrewd of Corman himself, kind of not a huckster, but a businessman as well as an artist, putting on the hat that he needs to when he needs to do it, but also, responsible in part for the reason why we had Ingmar Bergman movies in America in the 50s. So, it's even with commerce, there comes some really, I think, artistic value, but that it's not just the layer of the poets and the artists and the people who want to be poets and artists. And then, the busboy who wishes he could just fit in, maybe to get the girl, but maybe to get the recognition. But it's also this idea of like, hey, Walter, there's empty cups everywhere. Hey, what are you doing? And then like starts to see people have attention, like, I could have a show here. And to see that kind of, the kind of shrewdness of like, yeah, this week it's Beats, and this is the kind of guy that would also, when psychedelia and having happenings was the thing, you shifted over, right? Mm-hmm. And to have, kind of the awareness that like, sure, it's people expressing themselves, and it's, atomic panic, and it's, the lost man of history. But also, we really need to move some plates, and we need to get ready for the dinner crowd. To have that all on the screen in a B movie, like that's pretty good. That he doesn't really believe any level of it. He just kind of sees it all kind of moving. And then also the undercover cop, and with all the silliness there, but also this idea that like it is all systems kind of moving through this thing. It's not just yearning for self-expression, or people deluded into thinking that this is the new form that they can use to express their soul.
Well, and Corman was, like you say, a savvy businessman. He was, a great exploitation, had his finger on the pulse and was quick to get things out. And so, yeah, I think he was going, okay, we've done some biker flicks here. We've got, some monster movies here. And let's get some beat poets in there now, because that will resonate with somebody that's going to the movies these days. We want to comment on the things that are happening for the teens out there that are going to the drive-in.
Like I said, from the time Alice starts insulting him in the cafe until the end of the movie, I just think it's just like, it's so fast paced and it's so psychologically sound and interesting.
That whole sequence, that is his first murder.
Yes.
And that is the first time that we really see Walter taking a turn toward the dark side. He's just kind of been, seizing the opportunity with the murder of the cat, right, and creating Dead Cat, and then, creating Dead Man with the narc that gets killed in his apartment. With Alice, like, he lures her home and he deliberately murders her with the idea of not only, payback for her having ridiculed him,
exactly, but
like, this can be the next piece in his ongoing collection that he's
right,
been encouraged to create.
Right. And I think that's an important shift. And I think it's also interesting that we never, at least I didn't really change my attitude toward Walter. I still liked him after that.
Yeah.
He just made bad decisions.
Niall, I know you're a big fan of Walter Paisley, like, as a concept. Like, this is something we've joked about in the past. And what is it that appeals so much, do you think, about Walter Paisley? And, why does he resonate all these years later?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit just of that striving, and then also his shift when he's being praised, when he's got the he's got the tar guard, and he's fully in kind of artist in residence, artist kind of getting his recognition, and that kind of rise and fall, how quickly it is, I think is so great, because anything could kind of be condensed into with hopefully less killings, but that kind of rise and fall where you're just kind of stumbling through, and you have whatever they call it now, imposter syndrome, but worrying that someone's going to know you're a phony. Then you get recognition and you just try to keep the magic going, and then it falls off,
Right.
And so I think that just kind of as a little nugget of that, it's kind of wonderful. And, as we said earlier, but I think Dick Miller, the pathos of Dick Miller, and Dick Miller kind of in one of his few leading roles, is just so wonderful as a guy who's that striving kind of strain is so well exemplified. One of my favorite subgenres or sub-subgenres is kind of hapless comedy or hapless horror. And we've gotten, kind of back to it just to feel like in the past couple of years, things like Beau is Afraid, or not maybe strictly horror, but dream scenario, where you just have everything terrible happen to a character and then have them make it even worse. And so I feel like Bucket of Blood is really kind of the grandfather of a lot of that, where odd that they kind of knew to sell it as a comedy at the time, but the laughs are kind of commingled with quite a bit of darkness, but also just this total guileless guy stumbling along as he gets through it. Maybe I guess the other one, and I think it's even referenced in the way that the sculptures or the prop pieces are similar. But if anyone's a fan of After Hours, the Scorsese movie, which recently has been getting a little bit more love, the Griffin Dunn Nightmare Logic, yuppie experiencing Nightmare Logic in Soho. But I think in the same way, the sculpture of Linda Fiorentino's character really looks like Dead Man.
Yeah.
So I think that its traces are far and wide.
Well, and we've talked about Dick Miller, and for people who aren't familiar, Dick Miller is an incredibly prolific character actor, showed up in lots and lots of things, but most belovedly in these Roger Corman films. He was part of the stock company, and there's even a documentary called That Guy Dick Miller, because he became one of that guy. You don't necessarily know his name, but you see him over and over and over again, and he's always consistently doing something interesting, but filling the role. He's not stealing the scene, except by just being interesting. Perfect example is Little Shop of Horrors. He's one of the patrons of the shop who just happens to eat the flowers. He's that guy. But yes, check out the documentary That Guy Dick Miller, because it really does celebrate a character actor and just the whole idea of character actors in general, not just one person in this case. But any other thoughts on Bucket of Blood before we shift forward into Wasp Woman?
Just a couple of things I want to
Please.
say about Dick Miller.
Yep.
I think, like you said, always interesting, always fun. He reminds me of Bruce Dern in that he'll always just do something unexpected. But I think Bucket of Blood would not be as successful as it is without him, because the character, as we said, goes dark, but he's just so instantly empathetic and likable. I think he's one of the perfect everyman actors. So I really like the casting of him in this. And I think, like you said, it's one of his few leads, but it's kind of the epitome Dick Miller role.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I'll just say, for anyone out there who needs some inspiration, you're trying to, have the muse speak to you, I would say Maxwell H. Brock's opening poem, top notch. The sonnets will just fly off of fill the page after you hear that.
As you said, these do pair well together because they're both from Film Group, and that was Corman's distributing arm, because he realized, I could actually, I could distribute my own movies and not have to give a piece of the pie to American International. But we have some of the same folks on board for our next feature, which is Wasp Woman, also from 1959. Fred Katz, who does our music, that kind of fun, jazzy quality, that is here for Bucket of Blood, and it's also here for Wasp Woman. And we see our star of Wasp Woman show up in Bucket of Blood, which I had completely forgotten that Susan Cabot was in it. She's the one who, one of the folks who discovers that there's something beneath the clay that perhaps ought not be. If we look at Wasp Woman, it is Janet Starling, who is the head of a cosmetic firm, a eponymous cosmetics firm. And she has been the face of the cosmetics firm for a very long time, 15 years. However, she is starting to get on in years, and there's some concern that, a younger, prettier face might be what's needed. And yet she's so identified with the company, there doesn't seem to be much hope for a younger, prettier face that is also Janet Starling, until our scientist comes along with a handy new mixture derived from the royal jelly of wasps. And turns out when you inject that into an animal, it turns back the clock, such that you get a Doberman Pinscher that suddenly turns into a dachshund. It's pretty cool. Bunny rabbits that turn into hamsters. It's another one of those kind of fun Roger Corman monster movie cheapies that I love. And curious to hear where people encountered that one for the first time. Lynn, let's kick things off with you on that one.
I watched it on Sinister Cinema with my cousin Brad. This one I actually remember. I love Wasp Woman. I have much to say on this half.
How old were you when you saw it for the first time?
Probably maybe 12, 13.
Okay. Great. And Nile, how about you?
I think on that same DVD as A Bucket of Blood, but I will say that until revisiting it for our chat today, I think I was mixing it up plot-wise with Invasion of the Bee Girls. I think I thought it was a bit later of a one, and just the poster didn't speak out. So as far as watching it like cleaned up, and I think at its full runtime of about 73 minutes, I think I'd seen one that was, maybe more about 61. Just this past week was the first time I'd seen, I think, cleaned up and sounded and looking
in its full glory.
Good. Yes, exactly. With that Fred Katz score.
Lynn, yes, please tell us, what are some of the things you like about Wasp Woman?
I think, I'm going to start this right off. I am a out of shape, overweight gay man in my 60s. So I totally relate to this movie. I'm dead serious because, the young ones are always coming up on your heels. I think this is a really popular topic in movies because after I watched it, I just started ticking off movies that have the same young girls coming up on your heels, you're getting old and you can't, and you, heaven forbid, you become old. All about Eve. Countess Dracula, even. Death Becomes Her. Grace and Frankie has the exact same plot where Jane Fonda was the face of her cosmetics. And now she's old, so she sells the company to her daughter. Showgirls has this. And obviously The Substance, which is out now.
Yeah.
Is on the exact same storyline. I just like this because I think that is a really universal theme. And I think some of the things this movie does, even in dated old 1959, I think are very intentional. In the first, I actually prefer the shorter version without all the extra doctor, beekeeper, scientist stuff. Because I think it's a little more streamlined and it focuses more on Janice Starlin. But in her first 3 scenes, she's talking with men. All 3 of them tell her to stop interrupting them. It happens like 3 times in a row. Someone will say something. They'll ask for her input, but then when she gives it, they're like, let me finish. Don't interrupt me. Right. And I think that's really intentional. And just, the place women had in society, even a successful businesswoman. And I think we see this in the receptionist who's the queen of Flatbush, but as soon as the phone rings, she puts on this sophisticated, even sexual voice.
Yeah.
I think all of these things are really on purpose.
Well, and I love the fact that little nuance there doesn't get called out. Nobody says, oh, every time you pick up the phone, you sound different. Like, we just watch that actor take on that persona of receptionist.
Yeah.
And it's wonderful. But I agree, like how women are portrayed in this film, they are consistently, even the young ones are worried about being old.
Yeah.
And they're like, oh man, maybe I should turn back the clock a bit. And, the men make comments on like, oh, maybe you should look into that new invention.
Exactly.
And so, yes, it's a very clear commentary, I think, on, woman's place and that age is always the enemy.
You're right, Lynn, that I don't think it was just, kind of chauvinism of the times that this is the way it's written. I think it's written towards, some of these disparities. I also thought it was interesting how much, kind of vanity and envy play out kind of across the whole thing. And in this thing, it comes with beauty standards, but there's ambition in, kind of keeping the company afloat in the same way that, vanity, envy, striving come up in Bucket of Blood. I thought it was so interesting when our executive starts getting younger and the royal jelly starts paying off, that the receptionist doesn't even notice that the phone is ringing. There's this kind of, I think, shock or desire or whatever you want to call it, but, from the female characters towards the other female characters as well. That it's not just, this kind of thing of, guys giving wolf whistles. And I thought Barbara Morris, who we, talked about earlier, but I thought she occupies a pretty interesting spot where she's kind of going toe to toe, even with the guy who she's kind of dating, and he even says like, all right, if you've got enough blood on your claws or something like that, like he kind of knows he's been outgamed or outwitted, as they're kind of, having this, not really argument, but this kind of, verbal repartee. And he's like, well, let me buy you dinner, and this kind of thing that it's almost that he's kind of whatever hitching himself to her star, and that, all the kind of sabotage or the seeking out of, whatever the kind of corporate secrets that are happening, he initiates, but the men in it are kind of stupid, and they're kind of creating as much trouble as they're trying to, unearth, and that the detective kind of in the final act or the final moments is kind of flat-footed in the whole thing, right? He's there to deliver information. But I thought that was interesting that there's no real kind of one handsome male lead who's very effective.
Right.
We have our young man, but the professor's kind of doddering. No one can quite figure out what, the actual issue is with the serum. They think he's a huckster. They think he's wrong. Like no one quite has all the information. And again, I just thought in this kind of battle of the sexes element to the film that was interesting, that it wasn't quite as black and white, that, women are sad when they start to get old and men are smart because they are more comfortable with it or something. It wasn't that
distinguished.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, it's interesting, Nile. I hadn't actually thought of that before, but the fact that we don't really have a male lead that we are rooting for. Janice Starling is both our hero and our monster. We are rooting for her. We have great sympathy for her. And when she turns into the creature, we're like, oh, that's not good. Like how, like we want, it's almost like a Wolfman type of thing where she's been cursed and we want someone to come along and lift that curse. At the same time, we want our monsters. So it's a really fun dynamic that Corman is playing with there. We're rooting for them, and we also really want them to be monstrous as well.
And I think that kind of shifts our sympathies toward Barbara Morris more as well. Janice is still our lead, but I think Barbara Morris kind of becomes our heroine.
Right. We don't want anything bad to happen to her, which I think is funny that, like, I mean, clearly Corman had a thing for Barbara Morris because he put her in 2 movies where she gets to escape her fate at the end. She's right at the edge of disaster and then escapes, and then right at the edge of disaster and escapes. Am I wrong? But when we get those close-ups of like all the insects, those are bees, right? They don't look like the wasps that I have come to recognize. Like it has a big beekeeping thing going on. And I'm like, so where are all the wasps of which the title springs?
Yeah, they look like bees to me, to my untrained eye.
One of the many, I think, animal mix-em-ups in the same way that guinea pigs with their fur a little frayed become rats.
Right.
Yeah, as you said, Doberman becomes a dachshund. I think, it definitely seems like just honeybees, like, kind of apiary. Yeah. I'm not an entomologist, but I'm pretty sure, at least during, the kind of title cards and everything, that those are honeybees, because wasps are gnarly, which is probably why they didn't want to film them, is because those are mean guys.
Well, and they're ugly looking too, like, and I don't actually know that you can keep wasps the same way that you can keep bees. Like, I don't know that wasps are all that harmonious with one another.
Right.
But there's also something about that Wasp Woman in that it calls to mind the hourglass, and like, having the wasp waist is a desirable trait in a woman. And so again, I think it was the right choice. I mean, to call her the bee woman would not have been as alluring, perhaps.
Yeah, well, and just a word about the monster. It is pretty startling when you first see her. You think like, oh, well, maybe she's just going to be, because with the cat, like, just kind of looking kind of rough, like maybe she's just going to age rapidly, kind of even past her whatever long in the tooth 38 years or wherever she's supposed to be. I think she says she started the company at 22, so she's 38, which is
right.
But to see it really is, and then like the eating of the guy's face, like this is actually pretty good. It was startling enough to me. I didn't know what the reveal was. I don't think I'd seen before, prepping for our chat. I don't think I'd a clear picture besides the poster art of what the monster was going to be. I thought, oh, this is pretty gnarly.
Well, and I don't think we get a good look at it either, which is one of the things I do find a little disappointing about this movie, is that you don't ever really get a good look at the Wasp Woman makeup. And I don't know if that was they didn't have time. I have enough faith in Corman as a filmmaker that I think if he wanted to show it off, he would have shown it off. So maybe he thought it wasn't worth showing off. So it seems like it's a little shadowy, sometimes out of focus. Like I was looking for an image of it, and there just isn't one to be had. Like, you cannot get a really great clear shot of the Wasp Woman in full makeup. On the one hand, it speaks to the quickie, 1950s mentality. Corman being the guy who, like, we're going to do Attack of the Crab Monsters, and we're going to have an actual giant crab that somebody's going to be manipulating from behind. He seems like somebody who'd be like, no, let's give them the monster that they were looking for. So I'm not sure what the story is behind that. I hope someday that there's a really nice commentary track on a Blu-ray that, extols all of the behind the scenes.
I noticed that as well and wondered if it was just simply a matter of bad makeup or bad mask, not enough time to really do it. Because it's definitely shadowy, but I kind of kept wishing they hadn't shown her at all, that we just had like a Val Lewton cat people kind of, like where you just maybe saw shadows, or it was left to your imagination. Because what we do see is startling, I agree, but it's actually not very good.
No, it's kind of
what we can see, it looks kind of cheap.
Yeah, it's silly, it's cheap.
Yeah. Well, the one thing you do have is she's in the outfit of the Eames. I never remember who was Charles and who was Ray, but of Charles and Ray Eames, the female counterpart, where she is also kind of Maud when she's the Wasp Woman. She's in the kind of black turtleneck. Yeah. There's kind of like a jewelry piece, and then the slacks. And I thought, like, oh, that's interesting. Again, this kind of she's the most kind of modern and hep when she's killing people and eating their faces.
It does play. I do wish, again, that a little more attention had been paid, because like it's very clearly a mask, because we see her from behind, we see her flesh neck and then the turtleneck. So there's that gap. I wish they had the foresight to, do something where it came up like a hood so that we didn't see her human skin, because it does just kind of point up the fact that, yes, this person is wearing a mask.
Yeah.
And here's the little things on their hands. But there's also, I think, a charm to that as well. It's like, that it really does speak to, late 50s monster movies where it's like, you could truck anything out there and we'd take it.
I like both of those elements, but I like this movie so much that I wish it were better. I wish they would have had a little bit more money. My other big beef with the movie, not big, is that the killings feel random as opposed to with intent. Like, I wanted her to get revenge on all the men who wronged her.
Sure.
That's what I really kind of expected, but it seems like every murder just happens to be that's the person that was there at the time, especially the night watchman.
Yeah, Leo Gordon, who plays our night watchman, who also shows up in Bucket of Blood. He's the guy who's going to buy the dead cat piece.
Oh yeah.
The Poverty Row Orson Welles is how I always think of him from Dementia, right? Or Delirium. Sorry.
Yeah.
Delirium.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And he's also, he's done a ton of these Corman films. He also, I think, was a scriptwriter for several of them as well. Like he was kind of, he did a lot of stuff behind the scenes as well as on screen. To your point, Lynn, yeah, it does feel a little random. It doesn't feel as kind of calculated, and we don't get a sense of these people are just being murdered. And it would have been interesting, because they do talk about like the reason why she's murdering the men specifically is because that's how wasps are. They kill their mates. It would have been interesting to have that kind of seduction and then the murder, seduction and then the murder, instead of just, again, a guy wanders in and gets killed. Have either of you seen the remake from the 90s, the Jim Wynorski remake with Jennifer Rubin?
Oh no, but it's going on the list now. I didn't know that was out there.
Back when they were remaking a lot of these Corman films in the 90s, I think for Showtime. The one with Jennifer Rubin is actually one of the better ones, I think, because there's some really fun kind of morphing special effects of her turning into the Wasp Woman. And it's a much more elaborate costume where she basically is turned into a giant wasp with giant breasts.
But of course,
because it's Jim Wynorski. But that one is, I think it is worth watching. I think it is a lot of fun. I don't think he loses the spirit of this one. This one isn't as wacky as Bucket of Blood. This one is pretty much playing a little bit straighter.
Yeah, I don't think probably anyone would mix this one up for a comedy, at least in first run. Although I did appreciate, and this is not deep cineast analysis here, but I did appreciate just how our entomologist, scientist, I forget the character's name, but is kind of played by and then more and more played as just kind of a wino. He just looks kind of like a drifter, which I thought at first, like, oh, well, they just needed a guy and, they didn't have anyone else who looked more professorial. But then I thought, no, that's maybe actually kind of intentional, because everyone's kind of like hackles are raised. Like, I don't know.
Yeah, who is this guy?
Yeah, he's got to be, just a quack or a confidence man, because he does look. And I mean, even the end that he meets is kind of like, oh, he's run over in the gutters. I just thought, like, this is the kind of at Bunker Hill, like, just looks like kind of an LA drifter.
That's funny, because I wrote down Dr. Zinthorpe acts like the Nazis in the old 40s war films. That's exactly how he came off to me.
I'm just doing my job. I'm
Exactly.
Now, what you just brought up though, Nile, like that's where when he gets bumped and gets hit by a car and gets sent to the hospital, there's like a big old whopping hunk of padding there for like 5 minutes, 10 minutes, where we're trying to track down doctors. Where it's like, this guy's going to go in, show this picture and show this, but like this whole montage, as opposed to the chase scene in Bucket of Blood, where, like they're pursuing him, and he's running away and eluding his would-be captors. Like, I thought, like, and they both appear about the same time in their respective films, this kind of silent montage series, but one is really efficiently done and it propels the story. And this one kind of pads things out and slows things down. And it really struck me this time around. It was like, wow, this just feels like Roger's like, well, we need another 5 minutes here or else, people are going to be running for the popcorn stand.
Yeah, I will say, the one thing that I enjoyed, although I don't think it's his strongest work, is at least we have the Fred Katz score for while they're rolling out the Dragnet. I will say that as far as a montage of them rolling out the Dragnet, my takeaway is that you probably get away from that Dragnet. It's not you could probably just, grow a beard and start over if you were trying to evade it. This Dragnet, it has some holes in the netting.
Well, and one other person I want to point up is Daniel Haller, who's our production designer. He worked on a lot of these, cheap films and just kind of slamming the sets together. But then when he was given a budget, we saw the glorious films from the AI Poe series, like House of Usher, like Pit and the Pendulum. Like, he really was given an opportunity to shine. Corman, is renowned for giving people opportunities. And if you delivered the goods, as he would joke, you wouldn't have to work for him anymore. You would go on and have a successful Hollywood career. But Daniel Haller stayed in the Corman stable for quite some time and worked miracles on a budget time and time again.
Well, speaking of working for him, that just jogged my memory that you get a little Corman cameo in the Wasp Woman.
That's right.
As the doctor, when they finally do find our slightly brain-addled Wasp expert.
Well, I was so pleased because I was sitting with a group of people who weren't necessarily well-versed horror fans, but there were a couple of a certain age, and one of them went, "That's Roger Corman." And I was so happy that I didn't have to be that nerd to be like, and that's our director, Roger Corman there. And they're like, somebody else knew that right off the bat. I was like, that's awesome. Any final thoughts on our double feature for today? Roger Corman, Bucket of Blood, Wasp Woman, Susan Cabot, Dick Miller. Any final thoughts you'd like to share?
If anyone watches both of these, at home and it's their first time and haven't, checked out a lot of other AIP or Corman features, if you're dying for another just wonderful, emotionally resonant Barbara Morris scene, maybe not her largest role, but check out The Trip. Her exchange with Peter Fonda in the laundromat is genuinely like, that could be a little short film and it would win an award. I think it's one of the parts of that movie that really stand out as kind of beyond the sum of its parts. And it's a lot because I think Barbara Morris transcends sometimes the budgets and the genres that she's in.
That's cool. No, I've actually not seen The Trip still. So that gives me my impetus to do the Barbara Morris Triple Crown. Lynn, any other Roger Corman, like black and white films from the 50s and 60s that you're fans of that you'd like to highlight?
Not of This World? Is that the right title? Again, I'm going on.
Not of This Earth.
Not of This Earth. That's a highlight. In fact, my partner and I were just talking about that last night when I got home from Wales for some reason, because we were talking about this, and he said, "I like Not of This Earth." So that's one I would definitely recommend people seeing. I'm more of a Corman 70s fan, but I do like these old cheesy ones as well.
Well, let's talk that too. What are your Corman 70s that you'd want to recommend?
Oh, my go-to is Caged Heat, which I think is the best women in prison movie ever. Heaven help me. I like all the stewardess movies. I like all the I have like a box set of all like the young stewardesses, the young nurses, the young, I like all of those. I think the entire New World Women in Prison series they all have something to recommend, and it's usually the cast. Those are a definite go-to for me.
And those are Corman as producer. I don't think
Correct.
he directed. I think Jack Hill directed quite a few of those. But yes, Corman in the 70s. And then if you look into the 80s, you have Humanoids from the Deep. Which is a great bit of Corman exploitation, wildly inappropriate for today's audiences, and just as much fun for it.
I think another one really quickly that that really made me get the whole Corman thing was Hollywood Boulevard, which is made of so many clips from other movies, and they incorporate those so seamlessly. I think that's a really kind of a Corman-esque. I mean, that's an epitome of Corman movie I'd add as well.
The cozy double feature, if you've got probably 2 hours and a little bit of change, Night Tide. would be a good. I think it could go first or second in a bucket of blood run. Maybe first, just because its mood is definitely less jocular. But if you need more weird, lonely beatnik bars and a little bit of tilted Dennis Hopper as a sailor, and who doesn't need Dennis Hopper as a sailor from time to time? Check out Night Tide.
Yeah, agreed. I caught up with that not too long ago and was like, oh, wow, because that's another one that shows up on all the public domain. And I wonder if it is a Corman production, even if he's not someone who produced it outright, it might fall under the umbrella.
Yeah, a couple overlaps. And fun fact, Monty Hellman, I believe, who directed it, married to Barbara Morris.
I did not know that.
I did know that.
So it all comes in.
That's awesome. And that'll be the note on which we wrap things up. Thank you both so much for joining us for our October celebration. Looking forward to having you all on again very soon. And until next time, keep searching, keep exploring, and keep sharing the scare.